All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Workbar Live. My name is Chelsea Hildreth from Workbar. It's our pleasure to welcome Lona Alia, who will be presenting you today on fundraising and the documentation you need for investors. To start, just a little bit about Lona. Lona spent the last 10 years between Silicon Valley and New York, creating, running, and advising startups in the consumer space at the intersection of technology, direct-to-consumer, and social impact. She's been part of 3 accelerators and incubators, including Y Combinator, Women's Startup Labs, and Fashion for Good, where she worked with big brands such as Gucci, St. Laurent, Adidas, and more to help with sustainable innovation. She's raised $2 million for her startup and helped other founders raise millions through angels, VCs, crowdfunding platforms, and syndicates. She's super passionate about helping more entrepreneurs get funding to make a real change in the world. And I know that we're going to be putting you in contact with her. So Lona, we're very, very excited to have you with us today. Why don't we start? Just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do and how you got started in where you are.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. This is great. I'm really excited to be here. And as I told Chelsea, I'm really here to help as much as possible. In the last several months, mostly I've been upping up the calls with a lot of entrepreneurs that need help in the fundraising space, especially with what's going on right now with COVID. So I'm having a lot of conversations, and they're super helpful with entrepreneurs in terms of, who to raise from, how much to raise, what should be the cap, what is the strategy, do you raise from angels, VCs, friends and family, pros and cons, and we'll go through all of that with Chelsea here. But really my goal is, how can I be the most helpful to you? And it just really makes me happy to help as many people and give back, because I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I've raised money from Silicon Valley, from New York, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. So really from everywhere I've taken a check from, and I know how certain cultures work, and I know how to kind of like work around that. And I've heard pretty much every single question out there, every single, pitch. I like to see a lot of pitch decks. I see a ton of them. I know what is a good one, what it looks like, and of course, what your fundraising documents should be like, so you can keep that process super tight. But yeah, I'll leave it to Chelsea to ask me some questions. And then if you guys have questions, please put them in the comment or the chat box. And then we'll follow up with my email as well, if you want to do more one-on-one as well.
Yeah, and for everyone with us today, if you want to enter any questions that you have as we go in the chat box, I will either ask them at the end, or if it's relevant to what she's talking about in the moment, I'll ask right then. And also, I know we will be sending out afterwards if you don't feel like expressing exactly what you have in mind. Lona, after this, will be sending out her information, so you can schedule some time with her that she's willing to do for have an intro session. So that would be absolutely wonderful. But please, in the chat box, and if you hit to all panelists, then no one else can see it. So thank you for your intro. I know we're going to be talking about an array of topics today. And I'm certainly not the subject matter expert in this, so I'll leave it in your hands to explain everything. But let's start with telling the audience what documentation they will need for investors. What do they need to come prepared with when they walk into the room?
The first thing they will need will be the pitch deck. Obviously, that's the most important thing that any entrepreneur will have in their toolbox. And that's usually enough. However, I found, especially being a female founder, or if you're more like a minority founder, you will be asked a lot more other documentations. And those are basically the 5-year projection plans, because they want to see, where is your company going? How big can it get on year 5? And you really need to have those milestones kind of like planned out, as well as you show them exactly how much revenue is coming in, what are you expending it on, as well as your burn rate. So it's really important that you have those financial projections. And then the last thing that you'll need is an executive summary. So not a complete business plan, but an exec summary is usually 1 or 2 pages, which will go through basically anywhere from the introduction and kind of like a catchy line or 2 about why your company is so great, your traction, your team, go a bit more in detail in terms of who the team is, what school they went to, why are they so fit for this particular company. It'll have a snapshot of your financials as well, and then your ask at the bottom. So these 3 items are super important to have, just because when you're fundraising, you want to be able to quickly reply to all of these needs versus taking a week or 2 to get back to them, because then the urgency leaves and they will never really be interested again. So that's why before you go out, you have these 3 in your toolbox at least, and then you know that if that one investor really needs that exact summary, you have it. And if they really need those 5-year projections to invest, it's there. And you don't need to take time to find someone who's an spreadsheet guru or someone who's a great designer for your deck. I mean, you really have to have these polished. And also you can always iterate on them. So as you present and you get feedback, there is a way for you to iterate and always update them.
Okay, excellent. So, and after you have all of these documents lined up, how do you structure your fundraising for presenting to the investors, if you haven't already touched on that?
No, I haven't. Yeah, so that's it's kind of an art form of its own, right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you fundraise? How do you close these leads? And that's the hardest part. It's a sales job, right? Usually if you have some kind of a closing event, so for example, I went to Y Combinator, we have demo day as a closing event. And that is the best time that you'll have to close investors very quickly. So usually 2 weeks before demo day and 2 weeks after, you have the highest chance to get the most investors in. However, that's not to be said that you cannot do it afterwards. I was able to do it well into a year afterwards, just because it just took that much longer. So don't be discouraged when you don't have that closing event or when it's taking a lot longer. I mean, things take quite a bit of time, and finding that one investor is like finding one buyer for your home. So you have to talk to hundreds of them to be able to get one. And especially for your first check, you might talk to 20 investors before you even get a yes. And this could be just like a $10,000 check. So again, this is not to discourage anyone, but it is a sales game, and you have to keep a very tight process. You have to have a closing date. So say, hey, I'm going to start this process in September and I'm going to close it by the end of November. And the reason for that is that a lot of these investors go on vacation after November, after Thanksgiving. So really nothing is happening during that time. So you want to be able to find the best time to do that. Of course, if you can keep it within 2 weeks, amazing, you know, good for you. If you can schedule 100 meetings in 2 weeks and then get people to say yes or no, that's even better. But I know realistically, it just takes a little bit longer. So to keep it short, if you have a closing date, so if you're part of an accelerator or if you're part of something that you can say, hey, by the way, my demo date's coming up, or I have this thing where I'm getting $500,000 and I need to know whether you're in or out by this date. It's much more easier for you to close than just keeping it a loose process, because investors will take as much time as possible, right, unless they're pushed to make the investment.
Okay. And how much do you need to raise? Can you give us like a few different examples based on what it is?
Yeah, for sure. This is also a very good question, because it really depends. However, what YC says, Y Combinator, is that you should have 3 plans. So plan A is, how can you survive like a cockroach with basically zero money? Is there a way for you to survive with no money, and have that kind of like in the back of your head that you don't necessarily need the investor, but if you had the investor, you could do more. And then you have plan B, which is basically the plan that you will get a certain amount of money. So you need $1 million, let's say $500 to $1 million. And this 500 to $1 million, you have to really understand, what milestones am I going to hit when I get this money? And why do I need this money? Because the least money you need, the better. And the reason for that is that you don't want to be dependent on these investors. You don't want them to be constantly checking in on you and being like, hey, where are the metrics? Where's your milestones? You said you do this by September, but you haven't. So really keeping, the most percentage in your company and not needing investors should be your goal. It shouldn't be that I should raise the most amount of money, but typically what we see is 500 to $1 million for that seed Of course, you can see larger amounts when the market is crazy. But right now, I think 500 to a million is more of a reasonable amount. And then the cap for that, so how much do you value your company? It should be around 6 to 12 million. It's what we're seeing, mostly in Silicon Valley. So I think depending on your location, so if you're in Boston, maybe those valuations are a bit lower, just because there's not as much venture capital, let's say, as in Silicon Valley. You might have to adjust. But it's important to know exactly, what that money is going to get you, because some investors will say like, well, why 500? That seems too low. Or why a million? I mean, that's huge. Why would you need $1 million? So you have to have a very good explanation in terms of like, hey, we need the 500 because once we invest it in this, and that, the engineers, the marketing to this, then we're going to have 1.2 million ARR in 2021. So you really tell them that, by investing us in these really good areas, we will be able to return that capital by 3-4x. So really having that plan and being very clear will make you more confident versus like, oh, we're raising 500, I don't know why.
Right.
I think it's the right amount. But that's why it's also very important to have that 5-year projections, because it'll help you guide how much money you really need. And it's amazing what you see once you put things down on a spreadsheet and you're like, oh, wow. So it's really that many people it'll take to build this thing, or it's really that much marketing dollars I will need. And then look at comps, what are the other companies in your space doing? What are they raising? Can you do with less? Or do you really need that amount? If it's like a consumer app or a consumer product, you need to advertise to consumers. That's really expensive. So Facebook and Google and Instagram are going to be $100, person each to get a customer. So that's really, really expensive. And investors don't want to really see that. They want to see you have some kind of an angle or some way to get those customers without paying that CAC of the market.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And you touched on it a tiny bit, but can you just dive deeper into valuation and what your valuation should be?
Yeah, so this is an interesting point. Valuation is also something where a lot of founders will see the market and say, hey, right now, companies with my traction, with my team are getting anywhere from 5 to 12 million cap. So this is what we're valuing our company at, is X amount. And you can be pretty sure when you say that because you've seen the market and you know what they're going for. So if in Boston is about 5 to 6 cap, then you stay around that. It's not very important to have a huge cap, because that's going to convert when you go to Series A and it's not going to matter that much. So I wouldn't worry too much about that valuation. But you don't want to give away more than 20% of your company in your seed round. So for example, if you raise $1 million and your cap is 6, then you give a little bit more than 20% of your company. But if you can stay under 15% in your seed round, that would be perfect.
Okay, awesome. All right, now that we have a lot of the tactics lined up, let's shift towards the investors. How does one begin looking for getting capital, getting introduced to investors, and finding the right ones for them?
Finding the right investors will require a lot of collaboration with other entrepreneurs. So knowing a lot of other people that are raising a seed is very good, because you can trade spreadsheets, first of all, with lists that they have and you have. You want to be able to trade investor introductions. So if Chelsea is also raising seed and Lona is also doing that, I can be like, hey, Chelsea, can you please make an intro to your investor that you just closed? And here's my blurb. And that blurb is really important to have, your deck, and then 3 really good bullet points with your growth. And you just send that over to the investor. If the investor says yes, then you make the intro. If they say no, then you don't. So you don't really CC the other entrepreneur. You first tell them, hey, here's an opportunity. Do you like it or not? If they do, then you make the intro. But those introductions are really the best to get you the money. And that's how I raised as well, is really contacting a bunch of founders. And sure, some of them won't reply, some of them won't help you, but more likely than not, they will help you and they will make the introduction. So if your company is also really good and it has really good track record and traction, it will easily be able to get meetings. So it shouldn't be, that difficult. Of course, this time has challenges of its own, but that's another, story.
Okay. And who should you fundraise with? The family and friends, angels, venture capitalists, and what are the pros and cons of each one?
So you should be able to get whatever money is the easiest, get that quickly. So for example, if you can get friends and family money and it requires zero effort, do that because it'll build momentum. It'll be like, hey, I have $100,000 already committed. I only need maybe 200,000 more. So, you go to the angels after that and say, hey guys, because you're experts in this field, I want to get you in. And usually they write checks of $25,000 or so. And if you can close those guys, quickly enough, it'll build momentum in your fundraising process. Other people will hear about it. You will feel more confident. So, closing things quickly and also from people that are not so difficult, it'll be great. And usually those people are our friends and family, angels, things like that. VCs are a bit harder because they take anywhere from like 100 to 1,000 meetings a month. And really they just make, one investment from that. And usually the check sizes are 5 to 10 million, but they'll do seeds sometimes of 250K and above. So, VCs are a bit more difficult to just go in without having these other things closed. And also you want to go to the VCs last because you want to practice your pitch and your presentation with other investors first before you go to the big dogs, because they will chew you up if you don't have all of your things in order. So, having practiced, having heard all the questions beforehand, it'll make you that much more confident and prepared to go to the VCs. Mm-hmm. So I would recommend, yes, family and friends first. However, if you think that your company is so risky and you may lose the money of your family and friends, I would recommend against that, just because then you have to look them in the eye when you see them or when you go to Thanksgiving, I don't know.
Right.
And you might feel bad that you lost their money. But if they understand that this is the game of how startups work, and it's 1 in 100 make it, or I don't know what like the percentages of these companies, it's really up to them whether they want to invest. But you should be very transparent that, hey, this is a startup. I think it'll do well. I'm investing all my time and money into it. So if you're willing to do it, let me know. But don't convince them, and then they resent you afterwards.
Right, makes sense. And I know you talked about closing out rounds a little bit earlier, but can you just dive deeper into that kind of to wrap up everything? Like, how do you close out your round for investing?
So for me, what really helped is that sometimes you'll get that big check from one investor that gets the space, and he's like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And that takes hundreds of meetings, right? And I found that person through building that momentum, from growing my company, from having a lot of people in my network, from doing a lot of intros. This person came to me and he was able to give a big check. And once that big check comes in, everything becomes so much easier, because you can go back to everyone else that said no, or like, I'm not sure, or I need time. You can say, hey, now I have 80% of the round closed. And basically don't really need your money, but if you want, there's a little bit of room left, and you can put in, 100K or whatever it's left. And then you get that email to 100 people, pretty soon you'll be oversubscribed, meaning that you'll have a lot more money that you need. But yes, this is a lucky moment, I want to say, but also a hard-working moment, because for me, it came 2 years after I started my company, that big check. And then it came a year after I had graduated from Y Combinator, which is not very typical. A lot of companies will get the money faster, or a lot of them will just not get any money. But I just kept chugging along, and I was able to, get that money. But that was really helpful. If you are able to get, a bigger check, or maybe a customer or a strategic or something like you get a big letter of intent, or, a contract that will help you close that round. Otherwise, if the traction is not there, if the other investors or the smaller ones are not writing checks fast enough, it's going to be a lot harder to raise that round. And you want to think about the plan A of survival, like a cockroach until, you get to profitability. Right. Yeah.
Nice comparison. Okay, so I want to take this time to open up Q&A for everybody while we kind of wrap up here. Just go ahead, type them in the chat box if you have them. Again, if you're more comfortable just talking to Lona one-on-one, I'll be sending out her information after this. So Lona, just while we see if anyone has any questions, and to wrap up and pull everything together, can you tell us what the biggest takeaways are? Like, what should our audience leave absolutely knowing today?
The biggest takeaway that I would really give to any founder is that you should focus on building a company that customers want. So have a product that customers love and grow as much as you can. Usually during YC, they tell us to grow 10% week over week. So if you're able to maintain that kind of growth, amazing. Of course, it's really hard to maintain once you get over a certain numbers, because 10% of 1,000 or 1,000,000 is a lot more than 10% over $2. So I would say if you focus on that and you're laser focused and your company is doing well and you're growing, then you're on the right track. If you're struggling, and you still believe in it and maybe the market is not there yet, just really make a good assessment and see, is it worth investing more of your time? How much longer, should you wait? Give yourself a deadline, like, hey, I'm gonna see if I can fundraise until X date, and then if not, I'm gonna maybe look for another thing to do. So it really depends, but I think if you have a product that people want, you will not have a problem really being successful. But I know for a lot of us, it's tough, finding that product market fit is the hardest thing. Even if you get into Y Combinator, it doesn't guarantee that you'll find that product market fit. It really takes so much, to get there. And if you're one of the lucky ones, then really great. But if not, then that's okay too. It's like you learn from your process and then you iterate and you go back and do it better next time. So that would be my biggest takeaway. And then of course, with fundraising, I think I said most things, and we'll send out also some more other information that you guys can check out.
Yeah. Okay, so we do have a couple questions here, but they're kind of like all together. So how much should you budget for legal costs associated with fundraising? So from setup, disclosure, and others during your seed round. And why don't you start with that? Well, no, this is part two. Like part two is, can you set up your company properly so you can keep your legal fundraise costs as low as possible during a Series A?
Yes. So is it just for the Series A or is it for seed round?
I think part one is seed round and then part two is Series A. Yeah.
Okay. So for seed round, what I recommend is that you use Clerky, and that's what I used as well. It's also a YC company. It's an amazing website that I think you just subscribe to it for a small amount. And it's so easy to use. They do all of the paperwork. You basically just fill in the name of the investor, the amount they want, and then the cap. You put in their name, their email, signature, and that's it. You send that email and then you're done. They have all the information they need there. They have the wiring instructions. So how can they send the money to your bank? I've used Silicon Valley Bank, but Clerky is really the best thing that you can do because it'll make that process so fast and so cheap and easy that it will be really a pleasure to do during your seed, because you don't have time to send paperwork back in and out and then PDFs and all that stuff. This is just, you fill in the info, they send it to them, they sign, have the wire instructions, and it's done. And that's what you want to do. You want to keep this like really quick and flowing versus having to be stuck with that process for a while. In terms of a Series A, there's a few other companies as well that do that, and you can keep the cost much lower. I think there's also a YC company, it's called Atrium, Atrium, ATRIUM. And they, I think for a certain amount of money, they will do your Series A. And it's also very reasonable. It's very competitive. It's a very interesting place. I don't know if Clerky will do Series A just because it's a bit more complicated. When you get your lead, you know, the terms, all of that good stuff, you might need a bit more there. But I think if you look at Atrium and Clerky at the same time, you should have a very good idea and baseline because those are very, very good companies and competitive companies.
Okay.
Whereas with, you know, with lawyers, it'll be, depends on the lawyer, they'll charge you, you know, per hour. And I really hate that. You know, I want to have a transparent fee up front and not be able to rack hours and hours that I don't know what they're charging in the back, you know, for what.
Right. No, that makes total sense. I think it would be helpful too if we can send out the links to those two websites with the kind of survey recap. That way people have it. Just because, you know, that way we can say like seed round, Clerky, Atrium, Series A. That would be great. And then another question, have you considered alternative fundraising options, debt, preferred equity, revenue notes, et cetera?
You know, debt, not so much, just because it depends. You know, if you need to secure it with your personal wealth, I don't typically recommend that. A lot of investors will shy away if they see that you have debt on your cap table. So it depends really. Like if you need that debt to finance your marketing and you'll bring in X amount and you'll pay it right away or maybe in a year, great. But if you just get debt to finance something that you're not so sure about, it will be hard on you know, on the company and then on yourself if you have to secure that loan. Now, other routes of financing, of course, it's crowdfunding. I've done those as well, and they can be very successful if the process is managed well and you have very good help from the people that have those websites. So I was lucky enough to be, you know, in the first wave when they came out in 2000, say 15, 16, and really the founders were there to, like, you know, promote me, hold my hand, you know, follow up with investors, and they did a ton of work there. I don't know what it looks like right now in terms of doing it on those sites. I know that if you're like on Kickstarter, I think for women brands is a bit tough because not a lot of women are on Kickstarter anyway. So to get those customers go to Kickstarter, you have to spend a ton of marketing. So I don't know how, you know, how easy it is to raise through them. I would ask other people that have just recently, let's say, closed or raised from them and were successful. I wouldn't go in blindly, just believing them and saying this will be successful. But if there's other ways that you can present to investors and not pay money, then do that all day long, you know, because you want to be exposed to as many investors as possible, get as many meetings. You want to keep those meetings short, you know, 30 minutes or less. And you want to be able to control the conversation so that they don't go off tangents and start poking holes at your business.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more general questions. I'm sure that people will be reaching out to you for that one-on-one time. So thank you so much for being with us today. Again, to our audience, we'll be sending out resources and the best way to get in touch with Lona. So again, Lona, thank you so much for being with us. I know this for everybody had to be really informational, and I'm sure they can't wait to get in touch with you. So
Great. Thank you.
yeah, thank you again to everybody who attended, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.